Did you know in Egghead, Franky chose the futuristic clothing option over the Hawaiian? Ever notice the strange relationship between Robin and Franky? Why could S-Snake only half petrify Franky? All this and more in this week's Den Kushi video. Before we start though, make sure to do me a favour and hit that sub button, as 90% of our viewership is actually unsubscribed. Now, without further ado, let's get into this. Okay, so what we're doing here today is essentially an analysis covering Franky's inherited will, his birthplace, his ties to Joy Boy, and his connections to Pluton. So obviously none of them things we have confirmed. We're going to have to do a little digging and find out what clues we can basically look at and piece together what we can. So we're dropping some crazy discoveries about what we've found when looking at these things. Exposing some spicy secrets Franky may be hiding alongside me today is the eloquent and fellow TLA member StrawHatLucas, and we're dropping everything we've found so far on the shipwright of the Straw Hat crew and where his character development will end up by the end of the story. Like usual, we're going to start by giving you all the basic connections we found, which Lucas is going to start us off with in a sec, and then we're going to look deeper into what it all means. Okay, so if you'd be so kind, Lucas, take it away and get us started.
Thanks for having me, Din. Now, let me get into this. Hello, one and all. I'm StrawHatLucas, helmsman of the last arc, and I'm here today to bring the next part of a collaborative effort between myself, the rest of the crew, and our lovely Discord, which you should join through the link in the description, to figure out exactly what is going on with all of our favorite cyborg shipwright, Franky, and more specifically, his will. Din and I have a couple ideas about it that we think could go down, so make sure you yell out super, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and radical beam that bell icon for my captain Den Kushi to say thanks for mistakenly trusting me to take this seriously. Now, let's start with the will of D. Franky, besides being one of the sexiest Straw Hats, is one of 3 crew members that we know the least about, the other 2 being Nami and Brooke. So why is it that Oda has shrouded this man's past in so much mystery? All we know for sure is that he was abandoned by pirate parents on Scrap Island before being found and taken in by Tom. So let's take a look at some of the clues in subtext to see if we can't figure out a bit more about Free Rider Franky. Starting us off, we're going to dive into the sun iconography that ties our boy to Nika. Let's get the obvious one out of the way first, the Thousand Sunny. Built by Franky for the Straw Hats, the Sunny-kun's lion's masthead is adorned and stylized to resemble a sun. That's a given, and even the most casual fans can pick up on it, so I'm not going to dwell on the Sunny. Let's take a look at the next bit of evidence. Do you remember Franky's first introduction in the series? I'm sure most do, but let me refresh you a bit. Look at this beautiful specimen, but more particularly, look at the mask. The points upward and on the sides at first might make you think of a crown or a star, but combined with the frill of the collar, you get a different image. A sun. A sun nested on top of a bed of stars. Now, stars are all part of Franky's aesthetic, so why would he choose a mask and collar that resemble a sun? A symbol so intrinsically tied to liberation and Luffy in the story. Maybe it's a hint at his true lineage? Oda did use Franky to tease the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika on Zou. With all this sun imagery, it ties him pretty well to the warrior of liberation. Let's go a little farther, as I explain the most important piece of evidence for this whole idea of tying Franky to Nika in the Will of D itself. Also, before I do, if you want to stretch a bit, you could also say that his introduction as a child, Franky wears a shirt which bears palm trees that can only grow in climates with a good amount of sun, but that's kind of a reach. Moving on! Let's take a look at something I think most fans don't think about too often, and that's Franky's name. Not Franky, but Cutty Flam. Cutty, spelled C-U-T-T-Y, or C-U-T-T-I, or C-U-D-I if you're on the pursuit of happiness. Could come from 2 places. Cutty was once a slang term for perverted women, and Franky is definitely perverted, but I think Oda drew it from a different place. Drumming. Cut time, or playing cutty for jazz musicians, is a 4/4 time signature that has been cut to manipulate rhythm or tempo. This ties the name Cutty to Nika directly by the drums of liberation, but it gets even better when we look at Franky's first name, Flam. Also, fun fact from historian Cube of the Red Sea, in the French translations, Cutty can be translated with the TY becoming TI or DI, making his name literally Cut D Flam. But let's get to the flam. Flam, by definition, is a rudimentary and fundamental pattern within drumming consisting of a stroke followed by a grace note. When I first realized that not only Franky's surname but his first name both tie to drumming, it blew my mind. These combined with all the sun iconography that Franky is surrounded by tells me that Franky is tied to the D-Clan in some way, the enemies of the gods, and more importantly, to the sun god Nika himself. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below if you think Franky will be revealed to be a D-Clan member, or at the least, a descendant of the followers of Nika, which from my understanding are the Buccaneers. Now am I saying that Franky is a Buccaneer? Not necessarily, but the last art thinks that he may inherit their will, but we'll let Din get to that a little bit later. Now let's move on to the next bit of will that may tie into Franky, the will of the Niku no Mi, or the Paw fruit. Let me ask you a question. What was Franky's honeymoon arc? As in his first arc as a Straw Hat, it was Thriller Bark. And what arc is Kuma introduced? Thriller Bark. Now we all know Kuma was there to stop Luffy, but what if the will of the Paw fruit is intrinsically tied to Franky? Because to me, it's following him. After Thriller Bark, it's Sabaody, another massive interaction with Kuma and the fruit. Then, the most significant meeting with Kuma, at least in my opinion, Return to Sabaody, where he and Franky meet one-on-one as Kuma has protected the Sunny over the last 2 years. After this, Kuma is enslaved and basically a puppet, so he can't pursue and he only activates when Bonnie arrives on Egghead Island, coincidentally at the same moment Franky does as well. Now you may be saying this is all conjecture and circumstantial evidence, fair enough, but let me point you to 2 images that hit even more that Franky will get the Paw fruit and carry its will. That being not only this collar spread, where not only is Franky wearing a shirt with a bear that says the path of the bear, with his hair in the shape of bear ears, but Robin is also shown wearing a shirt with a blue bear akin to the same shirt worn by Mozu of the Franky family. Well, it's the beginning chapters of Egghead, where Franky is seen wearing a bear coat. Also, shout out to Mr. Bushido for pointing this out, big ups mate. How serendipitous and poetic it would be if Franky came onto Egghead Island as a bear and left as one. I think this, combined with all of the evidence presented by Din in the previous video, proves without a doubt that the Niku no Mi will go to Franky by the end of Egghead. This still leaves the question, what is the will of the fruit? The one that grants the hands of liberation. Let's head back to Den Kushi to figure out how the will of the Paw fruit is the will of the Buccaneers and their kingdom.
So thank you for that, StrawHatLucas. You've got to start us with some strange connections, not only with Franky but also the Paw fruit. Now let's look at some more ties and see how everything fits together and what it reveals. Primarily we're here to look into Franky's will. We can be confident each Straw Hat ties back to Joy Boy's era individually. It seemed to be the case for some of them initially, but at this point it's all but confirmed for every member so far. After releasing our first Franky vid months ago, I became super curious about Franky's ties to Joy Boy and the whole Void Century period, mainly because I just couldn't see any explicit connections between the past and the present with Franky's story, which I found very weird. However, with the new Franky video, some major elements came together. With a little help from Goad Roger and the TLA Discord server, we discovered there were 2 main paths to look into which could reveal details about Franky's inherited will, which were Franky's backstory and the ancient weapon Pluton. When we first start looking into this, we realise since S-Snake could only petrify half of Franky, it might mean he has partial invulnerabilities to other effects. That might have been what Oda was sort of hinting to us. This led us to look at Franky as a cyborg and whether or not he could swim if he ate a devil fruit. After all, this was the reason Franky gave for not eating the mirror to begin with. If, like the petrification, Franky is only half affected by the devil fruit's weakness, it may mean he's also able to go under water. For example, he could become a boat in some form or mix with the Sunny in a way that allows him to take the Straw Hats underwater, as suggested by some colour spreads. There are plenty more hints that suggest this as well. For example, when Luffy met Franky and Luffy commented Franky must be a devil fruit user right before he jumped into the sea and started swimming. Also, Franky's opponent in Dressrosa was Senor Pink, who obviously had the swim fruit, and Franky actually brings this up during the Egghead arc. Now, what's interesting interesting about Franky Cyborg's ship is that it ties closely to the theme of Klabauterman in One Piece. If Franky could swim with a devil fruit, even if it's with some sort of machinery or flotation device, then it would be pretty analogous to how ships are shown in the story to have a soul aspect. As I mentioned, the name given to the soul element in One Piece is Klabauterman. Franky was literally saved by a ship piloting itself, implying further ties between Franky and Klabauterman. We do see these vibes already with Franky and Kuma, as they're essentially machine bodies with human souls. I bring this up because there is something else in the One Piece world that many believe to be heavily tied to Klabauterman, while also connecting to Franky's love for ships and weaponry. The ancient battleship Pluton. In the recent anime episode, Franky had a very strong reaction to Robin revealing Pluton is in Wano, and in the manga he was one of the only characters to really care. Furthermore, Pluton is thought to have been constructed at Water 7, exactly where we met Franky. Interestingly, Pluton does indeed tie back to Joy Boy's era, perhaps suggesting Franky's ancestors were involved with Pluton too. Franky's parents were said to be pirates, strongly implying they're familiar with ships also. Franky built the ship the Straw Hats currently use, and we also saw he constructed 36 mini warships called the Battle Frankies. He then set out to literally make himself the ultimate weapon. Franky at one point had the blueprints to Pluton, and was in fact the person to destroy them, potentially being a reversal of his family making the blueprints or Pluton to begin with. Spandam demonstrated familial ties to the pursuit of Pluton. It wouldn't surprise me if it was revealed Spandam's ancestors were rivals of Franky's ancestors, and their relationship revolved around Pluton centuries ago. Franky was the reason Spandam wore a silver mask covering his face, which gives him the appearance of a cyborg. This is a nice touch from Oda, further connecting the two characters. We can see another tie with Spandam's weapon, Funkfried, which echoes the Klabauterman theme again, as it's a living will inside an inanimate object. I actually covered some ideas about Vegapunk and Funkfried in my Kuina Toshigi video if you did want to see more on that. Speaking of Vegapunk, many believe there to be some relation between him and Franky. Franky and Vegapunk share many superficial traits, but they also share some personality and thematic traits too, such as their mutual love for weaponry and scientific intuition. During the time skip, Franky was sent by Kuma to Vegapunk's home island. During Franky's backstory, we come across this weird situation with a mysterious boat that appeared out of nowhere and essentially rescued him, after Franky almost dies trying to stop the sea train. He went on to rebuild himself, after which his appearance resembles Vegapunk's designs, particularly the trademark star and weaponry. It's worth noting that yokai are traditionally individuals that have suffered trauma just to come back transformed as a demon, resembling what we see with Franky's rebirth, as well as with Kuma and many other characters throughout the story. Anywho, back to the mystery ship. Some believe this strange boat to be the Mad Ship, possibly the one on Dufeld's cover page during Egghead. This ship certainly has ties to Vegapunk, which we know through Franky's redesign. I, however, think it's more likely that Dufeld's ship and the ship that saved Franky are both something that connects the original equivalent of Mads, perhaps even Franky's ancestors. This could be Pluton, as I mentioned. I think it's possible Franky's ancestors made Pluton, at the same time creating the first cyborg by fusing a soul to a battleship, creating Klabauterman. But if this is true, wouldn't Franky be sought after by the world government for his important lineage and the threat he posed? Well, bizarrely, as Lucas mentioned earlier, Franky isn't the character's real name. Cutty Flam is. Now, there's 3 wanted posters we can look at for old Frankenstein, so let's start with the smallest. It's a standard wanted poster with the name Franky instead of Cutty Flam, and with a picture of Franky with a metal nose and shades on. The next is a picture of General Franky, again with the poster saying Franky at the bottom. So, here we see now both his name and real face are obscured. Finally, we have the latest bounty poster where Franky's picture was just a picture of the Sunny, and his name and bounty were concealed. What I'm getting at is, Franky's wanted posters have never shown his true name with his true face in the entire story. I mean, if anyone even saw Franky try to stop the sea train, they probably would likely assume he died considering he failed. So, if Franky does get involved with Pluton in the endgame, that'd certainly be his character going full circle if his ancestors were also involved in legendary shipbuilding, and might be a path that connects Franky's will to Joy Boy's and the will of D. However, there is a different angle we can look at with Franky that connects us back to Joy Boy, and that is his backstory. Again, there isn't a ton of information at face value, but looking deeper, we can unravel a lot more. Off the bat, we see Franky's adopted family show symbols that connect to the ancient past. Tom has the sun symbol, matching the other symbols of the 8 kingdoms I've discussed before, and Iceberg has the whale tail symbol I never stopped talking about, both of which can be traced back to Joy Boy's time. Franky can also be seen with this symbol in a couple of colour spreads. As Lucas pointed out, his real name Cutty Flam references a drum pattern possibly tying to the drums of liberation. Roger is one of the most connected characters to Joy Boy throughout the entire story, and Tom was the shipwright that built the Oro Jackson, which, by the way, is still out there somewhere waiting to be found. Now, with some of the basic connections covered, let's analyse Franky a little deeper and see what we find. I did briefly want to touch on Franky's link to the South Blue and the Buccaneer race and sorbet, but I'll keep it short as it'll all be covered fully soon in a big sorbet Buccaneer video, so make sure you're subbed for that. In this image we see a ton of chins and facial hair that match up. You can follow this all the way to King Wapple and his pink-haired Bonnie-looking queen Kinderella. These chins are mostly found in the South Blue, which is where Franky mentioned he's from. Similarly, we see this weird build among some characters tied to the South Blue. On Franky's pre-timeskip Jolly Roger we can find 3 dots. As I mentioned in the previous Franky video, the eye, when opened, reveals a similar symbol to what we see with Kuma and the Komati tribe in Buggy's cover story. The symbol is no doubt pretty old, knowing Oda, and the Komati tribe were depicted as primitive. If Franky is connected to the tribe, this would give us another tie to the ancient history. Franky has ties to Kuma and the pawpaw fruit that I covered in a recent video, where I also discussed Franky getting the fruit. In short, I think Franky ties to sorbet, and so does his family. I think sorbet specialised in weapons technology, leading to both Franky and also Eustace Kid ending up in the scrap heaps, in addition to them developing a penchant for weapons development. This could all tie into the Buccaneer will and how they had the technology to displace people, which is what the pawpaw fruit does currently. Seeing as we've seen Buccaneers revere Nika, they may have used the ability to help certain races who wanted to flee their lands. This ability may have been weaponized by the world government in the form of the pawpaw fruit, which could be a classic One Piece reversal. Reversing that again, Franky may then go on to get the pawpaw and displace people back to their original homelands after Luffy completes his dream. It would be a testament to his humanity if Franky used his powers with good intentions despite the suffering caused to him by the world government, as opposed to, for example, using it as a weapon. This brings us to the most important part of Franky's entire character, in my opinion, or at least what Oda is most focused on: his humanity. Okay, so let's tie all this together before the video gets too long. If we look deeper into the story's characters, we can find some interesting references to Franky's humanity. In this sense, Franky and Brook are like opposites, as Franky is a big body of machinery with little human parts left, whereas Brook has barely any body, but has his whole entire humanity left. This is why Brook plays music and Franky builds machines, for example. Brook captures the soul aspect being dominant, and Franky captures the physical aspect being dominant. Evidence Oda intends these connotations is shown throughout moments between the two characters, such as Franky and Brook crashing into Big Mom as a motorbike and rider. Big Mom is the Soul Queen, Brook is the Soul King, and Brook is riding Franky, the machine used to attack. One of the deepest moments between the two, however, might be when Franky questions how Brook survived for so long on his own, considering his isolation and loneliness, likely reflecting what Franky felt during his own childhood. Additionally, we see Franky's transformation from human to machine pretty explicitly, with him developing weaponized machines while wearing speedos revealing his pink human legs and eventually upgrading himself all the way up to a super weapon. We also got hints towards this in an SBS. We got shown 4 panels depicting 2 timelines. In one, an old Franky literally becomes a battleship. In another, he resembles the General Franky. This matches what we saw on the Wanted poster after Dressrosa, where Franky was depicted by a picture of the Sunny. A detail some may have missed is the clothing machine in Egghead, where Franky chose the futuristic style over the Hawaiian. Hawaiian is of course Franky's usual dress sense. Subsequently, we see Franky transformed into a complete machine pretty much, and although he shares the same perverted traits Oda uses to express a breakout of emotion or humanity, it's only Sanji that reacts to the attractive appearance of the females during the arc. Franky, on the other hand, is completely distracted and stunned by the technology he's seeing. This is all to convey Franky in a less human state. But why would Oda do this? It's actually quite simple. It's likely because Vegapunk, Franky's idol, has done things throughout history that has resulted in terrible tragedy, most recently with York and the Mother Flame. I guess the idea is Oda wants to secure Franky's humanity so that by the end of the story and further, Franky doesn't go on to make the same mistakes. This also works as a reversal with Kuma, who had his humanity taken over by the world government and Vegapunk and became a weaponized buccaneer. To finish the point, like many characters, Franky went through a transformation. More literal than most, Franky physically rebuilt himself as a cyborg, reminiscent of Kuma's transformation later in life, while also highlighting elements of Vegapunk's character design, such as the stars Franky takes on. The two options I can see happening here are either Franky connects to Pluton, which is used in the final war and then destroyed, or Franky upgrades the Sunny using Vegapunk's insight to essentially allow Franky to combine with the ship, creating a almost pseudo-Pluton. The latter idea fits with what we saw with Uranus being remade by York into a pseudo-Uranus known as the Mother Flame. Now, the point I'm making is, Franky needs his humanity intact in order to become a weapon on the same level as Pluton, while not abusing the power it wields. This is opposed to Vegapunk and his technology, which has led to so many civilian casualties, as I mentioned. In conclusion, I believe Franky was a child of the South Blue, where he was protected due to his lineage connecting to the creation of Pluton, and where he developed an affinity for weaponry. It appears though Franky has become more and more machine-like as the story progresses, but I predict after Egghead his transformation will be complete and he'll be a balance of human and machine, the perfect cyborg. This would then make him responsible enough to wield the same power as Pluton. By the end of the story, I believe Franky will learn about his heritage and will return some races back to their original home using the pawpaw fruit. One example possibly could be the Kumate tribe, and ultimately fulfill the will of D alongside Luffy and his fellow Straw Hats. So that's pretty much it from me, except I do have a couple additional observations I made along the way I thought may be important to note. Firstly, Franky has a very strangely strong connection to Robin, which is shown throughout many colour spreads and some major moments in the story where they share dialogue. This is likely because both share traumatic pasts since being pursued by the world government, and might suggest Franky's original home has been destroyed like Ohara. If you look into the colour spreads particularly, it kind of gets a little weird, like Oda might ship them. They're not too far apart in age, and Franky and Robin do portray literally opposite personalities, but that's just food for thought. And finally, something else that I thought was a little strange is Franky's fashion can actually be seen throughout the story with many characters. So I'll be interested to see what Oda gives us in an SBS or something to explain why so many people are wearing this. Okay, so with that, thank you very much. Make sure you leave a comment on your thoughts. Shout outs to the TLA Discord always. Bushido was the one who let me know about Kid being maybe from South Blue. As I say, we have a video coming out very shortly about the whole sorbet agenda. It's massive in scope. It covers a lot of characters and stuff, so that'll be interesting to get out. Make sure you check out Smokey's Alabasta arc review and his disco piece. He's a very good theorist, and he has this production that's very unique. Not many people have anything close to it, so check it out. Anyway, if you've made it this far, you've just won a free pair of pirate sandals. So let me know in the comments which one you want, and if you want 2 left, 2 right, 1 left, 1 right, just let me know. Anyway, much love, stroke a cat, peace.